Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be doing a machine from TryHackMe.com. I'm going to be doing kind of just a walkthrough of one of the vulnerable machines there. TryHackMe.com is basically, it's similar to Hack the Box for anyone who's familiar with it. They have intentionally vulnerable VMs, usually with specific goals, but oftentimes it's just that you need to get the user or specific root flags from each machine to show that you've first gotten your initial foothold as a user, and you escalate the privilege to the root or administrator level permissions. So the machine I'm doing today is called Attacktive Directory, which you can probably guess involves attacking Active Directory. So essentially, I've already started the machine here. It gives us the IP address. It starts with an hour, but we can add more time. And these little sections at the bottom, they guide you through what you need to do. So TryHackMe is a little more helpful than Hack the Box. They at least give you tips about what you're going to do, but the last step is the flags that you need to submit. So we'll go ahead and get started. We'll go ahead and start up the VPN for TryHackMe. So now we're connected. Done 0, okay. So I already have this separated into an Attacktive Directory, its own folder, just to keep everything organized. So we'll get started with an nmap scan. So basically what we're doing is we're running nmap for -sc is run default scripts, -sv is to enumerate versions of the ports that are found, -oa to output all formats, and to input and to save it to a file in the nmap directory called initial. So SV is going to enumerate the specific versions of each port that's open, and then from the list of ports that's open, it'll run default scripts on that. So for example, if it finds HTTP on port 80, it'll run several scripts to try to get the banner, try to look at robots.txt, things like that, common vulnerabilities that are seen for each port. So this can take a couple of minutes. I've actually already ran it to save time. So if we look at it, we can see there are quite a few ports open. The IP addresses aren't going to match up with what's here, as I ran this before on a different time, but same port, same machine. So from here we can see there are a lot of different ones. So we have DNS on 53, HTTP with just default IIS, Kerberos, LDAP again, RDP, SMB, a lot of different ports, and all these together kind of indicates that it's most likely a domain controller. And the nmap scripts that I was mentioning here, so when it found RDP, it ran a script here to get more information about the machine. So we have the machine name, thm-ad, the NetBIOS name, the domain name, spookysec.local, that'll be more important later, and just general information that could be useful as we come across it later on. So to start with, since I saw SMB is open, I'm going to poke at that just a little bit to see if anonymous access is enabled. If it is, we might be able to at least list the shares, see any files, see what kind of access we have, things like that. So I'm going to use SMB client actually, say -u and then just a blank username, and -n for null authentication. So basically checking to see if anyone could log in. Say -l to list shares. And we have to do 4 slashes to escape the slashes, just for when we're dealing with Windows. It doesn't work without those. So we run that. It doesn't let us do it. We can try again with SMB map and specify maybe the guest username. And it still doesn't let us in. So it doesn't look like authenticate or anonymous authentication is going to do anything for us here. So the next thing that I would want to look at is with Kerberos running, there are some interesting things we can do with Kerberos if there's some certain misconfigurations that are set up. For example, if the setting for no pre-authentication required is set up on a specific account, we can poll the Kerberos distribution center, which gives out the tickets to each individual user, and if we can get the correct username, we can get it to give us the ticket, which then we can crack and get the password for a specific user. To do that, however, we need to find out any valid users. So this machine actually, we can find a list of valid users anywhere online. If you just search user word list for GitHub, there are plenty of them on there. This one gives us a smaller list to work with. This users.txt here. I think it's 100,000, so we're not going to go through the whole list, but you can get an idea of what's in here. It's just a bunch of random names, usernames, things like that. So what we're going to do to guess those names, we're going to use a tool called kerbrute. And it has several different functions. You can brute force passwords, a couple different things, but you can also use it to try to enumerate valid usernames. So we're going to use the user enum function here, and we'll give it that function, point it to the domain that we want to target, which we saw in the nmap results before, and then we'll give it the word list that we want to use against it, which is going to be the user.txt that I already have here. So go to the compiled version, and I'm on a 64-bit VM, so we'll use AMD-64. Okay, so from here, we want to say the command we're going to use is user enum -d for the domain, which was spookysec.local, I believe. Yep, spookysec.local here. Say spookysec.local --dc to give it the target of the domain controller, which is going to be just the address of the machine for now. So 10.10.125.139, and then the word list that we want to use, which is home click, TryHackMe, Attacktive Directory, users.txt. So when I run this, it'll start polling the KDC or the Kerberos, basically the domain controller, to see if it has anything for the specific user accounts. And we can see once it starts going, it goes to the list, it finds James is valid, svc-admin is valid. And it's going to take a while to go through all of them, so I'm just going to let it run for a minute or so because there's a small list of names that we want to work with just to save time. So for now, I'm going to make note of what these are. And one that stands out right away is svc-admin, because anything with administrator or admin or anything like that seems like it could be useful if we can get access to that account. So far we have 5 names. It's going to pull the same thing for James, whether it's capitalized or not, so we don't need both of those. And then we have one more for backup. And I'm going to actually stop this now. We'll add paradox to the list, but I'll stop this for now. It'll keep going. It'll loop through some of them again for a capitalized first letter. But for the sake of time, we'll stop that. We already have the list we need. Save this as a list to use later. We'll call this Kerb users. So now we're going to go to another tool, now that we have a list of valid usernames, called Impacket. And Impacket is just a collection of Python scripts that can be used for a variety of different things. The one we're going to use it for is to poll Kerberos for those usernames to see if it has the pre-authentication setting that I mentioned earlier. But there are a lot of different things. You can poll AD. You can get golden tickets if you already have an administrator. You can use a Python version of psexec if you have an administrator, which will then give you a shell as system. Just various different functions. Secretsdump, which gets information from the NTDS file, password hashes that are stored on the domain controller. This will again come in later. SMB server, an easy way to start a SMB server on your machine if you want to share it to another machine. So for now, we're going to use the command for get np users, which is basically get users that don't have I'm blanking on this, pre-authentication set, so no pre-authentication. So if we run that and go up a little bit, it queries the target domain for users with do not require Kerberos pre-authentication set and exports their TGT or their Kerberos ticket for cracking. So basically this setting, do not require pre-authentication, the pre-authentication is enabled by default, and it's meant to try to, as a protection against password guessing attacks. However, in a lot of environments, it'll be disabled on certain accounts that are used on applications that don't support Kerberos pre-authentication. And if that's the case, then we can, as we'll see in a minute, we can poll it, get their ticket, and crack it to get the actual password used for that user. So since they're usually used for applications that don't support it, a lot of times it might be a service account. So looking back at our list, this service admin looks like a prime target for that. I'll run all of them through it just to be sure so we can see if any of them else come back with those results. We'll use just a quick bash script. So for user, just to loop through that file and run the same command on all of them. TryHackMe. Actually, we need a backtick for this to work. Okay. Do Python get np users.py, and then we need to feed it the domain. So I'm following this right here. We want to get a ticket for a user. So we'll say spookysec.local / user. So we're using this variable. It's going to loop through the file, and on each line it'll set that name to the variable user. So we'll say for each user, run it against this. We use the flag no pass as we don't want to provide any password. Set the domain controller IP to 10.10.125.139 and done. So we can see it's looping through each username here. And most of them say pre-auth isn't set, client not found. That's because it added the little curly bracket here, which doesn't really matter because we don't need that one anyway. But most of them say it doesn't require pre-auth, but service admin, we can see we do get this hash. So what I'm going to do, now that we have the hash, we can switch it over to another program to try to hack it or to crack it. I'm going to use hashcat, but we need to know what format this hash is before we can crack it. So an easy way to do that, if we Google hashcat example hashes, this page has a long list of a lot of different types of hashes, but if we take just part of it, usually the first part, Control F, and search for it, we get the example hash that matches that format. So Kerberos 5 srep, and this is the important part, that we're looking for this mode, 18,200. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to copy this hash one more time, and to crack it, I'm actually going to do it on my host machine. And I have that file saved in hashes.txt here. So we can see it's service admin at spookysec.local. We'll run hashcat64.exe, and so -m is the mode, so 18200. -a is the type of attack. There are a variety of different ones. We're going to use 0, which just means standard or a dictionary attack. But we're just going to give it a word list to try against the hash over and over until we find the correct one. So then we're going to give it the hash file. So hashcat hashes.txt, and then the word list we're going to use against it should be hashcat rockyou, which has about 14 million passwords in there from various different credential dumps. It's a good one to use for now, but it should find this relatively quickly. So we're using hashcat mode for the specific hash that we're using, the dictionary attack, the hash file, and then the word list that we're going to use against it. So if we run that, it'll start up. We can see it does have the right hash type here. It's actually already identified it as management 2005, so that's service admin's password. But for this particular hash, if it wasn't found, we can see that with the speed on this particular computer, a lot are going to be faster than mine, but this is going through 11 million hashes per second. So pretty fast. Okay, so we know the password, management 2005. We'll switch back over here. Just take a quick note, service admin management 2005. So now what can we do? We have a valid username and a valid password. Now we can go back to something like SMB to see what shares this account has access to. So we'll give it service admin, password management 2005, -h for the target, so 10.10.125.139, and see what we get. Okay, so we see the shares here. We have some of the regular ones, admin, C, IPC, and then two other ones that kind of indicate that it is actually a domain controller. Sysvol will store group policy information. So this is another potential threat vector on some Active Directory domains. Not on this particular one, but it does indicate that it's probably a domain controller, or that it has access to a domain controller. But the interesting one here is backup, which is not standard, and we do have read access to where we can see what's on there. So we can use another tool called SMB client again, and we'll give it service admin and 10.10.125.139. We're not going to use the -L this time because we don't want to list the shares. We've already seen those. Now we want to actually connect to it. We'll go to backup. It'll ask us for the password, management 2005, and we're in. So if we dir, we can see one file in here, backup credentials.txt. To stay organized, I'm going to actually go back to here and make a new directory called SMB just to keep everything in the right place. Connect again. Oops, typo. Okay, so then we can get backup credentials.txt. And we can see we successfully downloaded the file. So if we go back, now we have that file, backup credentials.txt. If we look at it, we get a string of what looks an awful lot like base64. So to see what that's actually saying, we can echo that to base64-d, and we get some more credentials for backup at spookysec.local and backup 251 with his password. So we'll copy that, add it to our notes over here. And since we didn't see any other shares of interest to this account, we're not going to go much further with this one because backup sounds more interesting. Given that it's probably a domain controller, if there's a backup account, if it is actually backing up information, it would need to have access to the sensitive information in Active Directory to back it up, which could be things of interest to us, like password hashes. So we'll go back over here and we'll run smbmap one more time. And this time we'll give it backup and the password. $10, $10, $125, $139, and see if we get anything different here. Nothing different. The access seems to be the same. We actually don't have access to backup with this backup account, which is interesting. But not much else to go on here. What we can do from here, though, in Impacket, I mentioned there were other tools we can use if we have higher access on the machine. One of which is secretsdump. So what secretsdump is going to do, if we read the description here, various different techniques to dump machines or dump secrets from the machine without leaving any information on there, without executing an agent. So to be able to do it, you obviously have to be an administrator or you have to have access to the secret information you're trying to dump. So we're kind of assuming that the backup account is going to have elevated access at this point for this to work, but we can try to see. So secretsdump.py, and we want to, so we'll say, I believe it's just domain username. Let's try backup, backup 251 7860 at the target. So we'll say 1010. I should really remember the IP by now. 125.139. And we'll give it the DC IP just in case it's needed. Secretsdump, backup at the target. And that should work, I believe. Let's see. It did not. Oh, because we don't have permission to write the session file. So what we can do is we'll switch back to our home directory where we do have access to write. And then we'll say Python, opt, Impacket, examples, secretsdump, and then we'll just copy the rest of this and try it one more time. Okay, so as we can see now, this account does actually have access to the NTDS.dit file, which is now dumping the secrets, which is the hash for all the accounts on the domain controller. So it's dumping the full hash, the first part being the LM hash or the LAN manager, the older ones. These don't necessarily matter in this case. So you can see they're all the same, AAD3B, AAD3B, AAD3B. What we're looking for is the second portion, which is the NTLM hash. And now we could use something like this Kerberos TGT. This is the Kerberos account that grants tickets. We could use it to create a golden ticket to access other machines on the domain. You can use for any of the other user accounts on the machine. But for now, we're going to use the administrator account just to become an administrator on this particular machine. And we don't even need to crack the password in this case. Because we have their hash, there are other tools we can use to do a pass the hash attack. And one last thing that I didn't mention earlier is I also did an all port scan with nmap just to see if anything else was open, because the default scan for nmap only scans the top 1,000 ports. We did an all port scan and we actually do see a couple of extra ones. We see the normal one we saw before, DNS, Kerberos, LDAP, but then we have 5985, which is PowerShell remoting. And there are other tools we can use from Linux to access that. For example, one of them is called evil-winrm, which if we provide it a user, administrator. There's an option to use a hash for an NT hash, so we can say -h, give it the hash, and -i for the IP address of the target, so 10.10.125.139. There we go. And now we have a shell on that machine. So if we say, who am I? THMAD administrator. mi/all. You can see all the different privileges we have. We have debug, impersonate, all the ones that that an attacker should not have. So at this point, we could get the flags that we're looking for. Usually they're going to be in the desktop folder. So we have root.txt. I won't show it just in case someone wants to do this on their own. But we're a local administrator on this machine. We can do anything we want on this machine, and from the secrets dump we saw earlier, we can create other tickets to log in to other machines on the domain. One last thing that we can do though is, administrator is a local administrator on the machine, but it's not system. System is the highest access we can get. Conveniently, there is one more Impacket script that we can use. Preface this with Python, and that's psexec. So psexec does need an administrator account to connect to the machine. So if we say psexec and then administrator at 10.10.125.139, we'll say DCIP again just to point it to the right place. And then what we're looking for is this hashes option. So it does want the whole hash. So if we go up and take this whole thing and say -hashes, provided that. So we're logging in as administrator to the machine and using this hash to connect with. It first checks for shares that are writable. It doesn't need that for this method. Found admin is writable because we are an administrator. It uploads a file that basically creates a new service on the machine, and when the service starts and calls back to us, we get a shell. And notice we're in the system32 folder this time, which means we are NT authority system. So we have the highest access on this machine we need without using any exploit at all, because Kerberos is configured not incorrectly, but it's configured in a way that can allow people to abuse the privileges certain accounts have. Okay, and that's about it. We're finished here. Hope everybody enjoyed.